If it was an ordinary time and ordinary broadcasting here on ABC Radio Mornings, Victoria as well, we would be talking to David Whiting, our talkback lawyer, and taking your calls on all sorts of legal issues. But we thought we'd see if he was free and if he could pop in today and have a chat with you about some of the legal issues, questions, queries you might have arising from these catastrophic bushfires. Possibly it's a bit too early to be talking about insurance and insurance claims and the like, but there are questions about liability and responsibility. Might even be some questions about refunds and the like from holidays that you have now abandoned just a couple of days in. Or also about tenants that you were providing for through the fires. Let's keep our discussion this morning bushfire focused and related, but if you'd like to join in that conversation, the number is 1300 222 774. 1300 222 774 is the number. And David's got a number of issues that he'd like to spool through with you anyway, arising from these disastrous fires. David Whiting, good morning and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Virginia.
I know that you've gone into bushfire communities following large fires in the past.
I was the Law Institute put together a team of volunteers in the 2009 fires.
Yes.
And I went up to Kinglake. I must say my first impressions were the extraordinary crews we have at Vic Roads who put in what I'll call the road furniture. The Armco barriers were replaced, the white lines were redrawn.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
To make it safe for people to go in and out. That was the thing that impressed me most. But when I got there and there were a group of volunteers who served over a week or so, is that what people really wanted was advice in relation to, I need somewhere to live, I need access to Centrelink resources. So they struck me as being the people who were needed up front most of all, certainly not lawyers.
You're not making this is not a long lead into the old joke about how lawyers are not necessary, is it?
I've never heard that joke, I must say. I wouldn't believe it if I
really?
felt it. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, look, I'm sure in the early days that's absolutely right. It's social services and that kind of support that's needed. And indeed, we're not even through this bushfire crisis in any case. But nonetheless, immediately there usually are some issues that arise for people, for businesses, for individuals and the like following a catastrophe like this.
The first bit is to prove your identity.
Right. And
we had after the 2009 bushfires, I got a contact from a person who had bought a property from my client 20 years before, but had never registered the transfer. So presumably ducking the payment of stamp duty, but we'll skip that one.
Okay.
And we were actually able to provide records of a property transaction that had occurred in the late 1980s. And they were able to use that to get a title. So what you find is the government's fantastic about accessing lost title applications at Land Use Victoria. There are issues about getting identity documents, birth certificates, driver's licences, those kinds of things, history, tend to disappear. So the government authorities make that easier because they're the essential documents that enable you to get to the bank and prove your identity because your cards have gone at the same time.
Well, that's interesting. I should have reflected on that before we even started this conversation, that if you've lost your home in the fire and you weren't able to grab everything out before you left, you may have lost now and there may have been totally destroyed a number of really important documents. Is that a tricky business to go back and get them all again and to re-establish your identity and get the important documents you need to access those services you were mentioning just before?
At the moment, everybody's on the side of the fire victims. So to some extent, the rules are being less rigorously enforced. Now's the time to deal with those issues.
Mm. When you went into communities that were affected by bushfire, I think you went into Kinglake as well,
Yep.
Was that right,
Yep.
after Black Saturday? Were there some legal issues that you could be helpful over at that point?
There were issues in relation to, there were landlords with rental problems, there were tenants with rental problems, wanting to know what their obligations were. In relation to the tenant side, there's an application you could make to VCAT to bring the lease to an end. And you can do that because the landlord is no longer providing the house. So that's from a tenant's point of view. They were the kinds of things, or what do I do in terms of? They were more in terms of material things. I need access to a car. I need access to social security. They were more cash related than anything else.
Let me move on to a slightly trickier area, and might even be a little bit discomforting for some to talk about it. But I know it's the reality for thousands and thousands of holidaymakers. They've lost their holiday.
Yes.
They've either had to abandon their camping ground or their holiday tenancy, sometimes after just a couple of days. And in a lot of cases, if you're talking about that eastern seaboard, they've paid top dollar for a couple of weeks' rent during the summer period. If they want to, and not everyone wants to, but if they want to seek a refund or anything, do they have any?
My view is that they are entitled to a refund because the landlord, for reasons that are clearly not the landlord's problem, is not able to provide the service.
Because that tenant has been ordered out of the area.
Yes. Yeah, as has the landlord, quite likely.
Yeah.
But you've been required to go. So in those circumstances, there's a failure of consideration. At that stage, it's the landlord who's the one who bears the cost, because most landlords for holiday rentals will not have loss of rent insurance.
Well, I see.
So what they would have would be a landlord's package that would include. So my recollection is, because we talked about this a little earlier or last year, was most landlord insurance policies don't cover you for the first month's rent. All right, so that will be a whole lot of people who come along and say, well, I now have to wear that. So the landlord is the one who will lose in those circumstances. Now, if you pay by credit card, you can ask for a chargeback on the basis that there was a failure of consideration. If you have paid cash to an estate agent then you simply make a claim on the landlord. But that's hard. That's a VCAT application.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
It feels a bit yucky, doesn't it? But at the same time, I know that people have lost a lot of money. But I don't know if you'd necessarily want to go back to a bushfire-affected community and ask for that money back.
Well, no. I bet you might strike a deal. Let's both be losers in this.
Yes.
And I must say, I wouldn't have liked to have booked a holiday and then find that the venue was no longer available to me, but I didn't get any money.
Interesting. These are the tricky questions that people are going to be fronted in the aftermath of so many people losing their holiday. Peter's in Surrey Hills. Good morning. I think you've got a slightly broader legal question here. Good morning.
Oh, yes, good morning. Just got a query about the legal implications of gross dereliction of duty of federal politicians, the Australian government, essentially.
What do you argue is their dereliction of duty?
Well, they've had warnings for over a year from bushfire experts that there's going to be increased catastrophic fire events, and they didn't actually prepare, so they haven't got the...
Well, let's take it a step at a time, Peter. In terms of the politicians as individuals, no liability. All right? They are individuals or members of a party who are expressing a political view. You may think they're wrong, you may disagree with them, but the law as it currently stands allows them to make those statements. Right?
Okay.
If you then want to take it to either government itself or an arm of government, then what you would need to do would be to establish that they had an obligation to do a particular thing and failed to do it, and as a result there was loss and damage suffered. So that is the hard bit. So in the event that was to happen, there would be a civil claim for loss and damage caused as a result of a breach of an obligation. In terms of criminal implications follow a breach of the law. Though it's got to be it needs to be a crime that has been committed. So we often talk about neglect that's almost criminal, but if it isn't criminal, it's not a crime.
I'm actually glad you raised this, Peter, because thanks for calling in. It's been a recurrent theme on social media, about various people saying, let's raise a class action against the federal government for what they didn't do in relation to bushfire prevention or taking climate change seriously and the like. And I actually think it's quite interesting to get a dispassionate legal response to what's been a virulent discussion on social media.
So I should damp down the enthusiasm, should I, Virginia?
You are simply here to be the reasonable voice of the law, which you always are.
I think there's, all of these, I look at this and I say, well, we've seen over the last 3 weeks, there's this division of responsibility that really needs to get worked through. Who takes over? We've got these ADF volunteers, the reservists have called up. Who do they answer to? Does that mean we've got 2 or 3 or 4 teams running in a town or an area that all not respond to different chiefs? That was the bit that perplexed me with that announcement.
Yeah, it's true. It was the division issue and who's responsible for what. Well, that's the eternal dilemma of the Federation, isn't it?
Well, no, but we even have it locally. The distinction between the volunteers and the paid CFA people is an issue which will become more highlighted as a result of the reflection upon the last few weeks.
Now, I think I unfortunately just lost this call. We had a call just before, but I'm going to ask it anyway if I remember correctly. And that was from a bloke who called in who was on the tractor, asking about whether there was any recourse to the law over who, if there's a failure of duty to clear the roadside of hazards and the like and timber and that which might cause a bushfire. I think it was Hamilton who was on the tractor. If the CFA and the local farmers don't have the time to maintain the roadside vegetation, who's responsible if it contributes to a bushfire? You may not be that...
Road Management Act.
The Road Management Act.
Nobody.
Yeah.
All right.
So what do you mean?
Well, we talk in terms of road authorities have obligations to do certain things. But if it's not an obligation under the Act and it's not part of their commitment, then they don't have to do it. We've had, and it arose out of a series of stumbling cases where people are going for a run and they stumble over a tree root.
Yep.
And the question is that the authorities, local authorities, to make sure that you're not going to stumble over a tree root? And it comes from a line of highwayman cases in England, where the question was, I'm riding on top of a stagecoach. If the branch is too low, whose fault is it? So while we talk about offences that are committed and and matters that are omitted, and generally speaking, there's no liability in a road making authority for an omission. So we get them for, if you like, failing to put a guard around a hole on the road while they're doing work. But if the hole simply happens, no obligation.
David Whiting is with you, our Talkback lawyer, and today we're taking your calls if you have any queries or questions for legal issues that might be bushfire and disaster related. If we can be of any assistance with some quandaries that you have in relation to stock or property losses, liabilities or responsibilities, we're happy to help. 1300 222 774 is our number. Dave's called in from Harriettville. Hi.
Oh, good morning to both of you. Yes, we've got a guest house up here and we've pretty much lost all of our summer trade. Not only the town hasn't been affected by the fires other than us having to evacuate. We've been really lucky up to this point. But we have lost our trade. And one of our guests that are meant to be in right now, they negotiated with us and said, look, we don't want our money back. We would love to book at a later stage, so it ends up being a win-win situation for both parties, and that's a really good, I think, way for any guest houses or accommodation businesses to try and work with their customers. So,
Dave, I think you're absolutely right, but you're the loser, all right?
I am.
You're the loser because while you're not getting paid for this week's accommodation, you're swapping it for one in September or October or in 12 months' time.
Or in 2021, you won't make any income, Dave, if they do it next year, for example.
So
no,
for people in your position, I would be looking to see what your business interruption insurance is, what a lot of businesses would have, what guest houses would have, and I'd be looking to see what cover there is in those policies. But I take your point. If you were a private renter and a private landlord on a holiday house or whatever, that's something that you could consider.
Yeah. It's we do have off times of the year as well, and although they're not as highly desirable, it's still an area of negotiation that you could fit something into those times of year as well. And everyone has been pretty supportive, as you know.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's lovely to hear that people are being reasonable and negotiating with you. I'm sorry you've been through such a hard time. Dave, where are you at the moment?
I'm back in town grabbing a few extra things to take away. Unfortunately, we had a family holiday planned and we had managers in place to look after our guest house while we're gone, so I've had to send them home.
Yeah.
We've closed down, but my son and I are heading off overseas, and so I'm cleaning the whole house out basically in case it reoccurs, and getting it all into storage while I'm away, because I basically once we go, I've got no way of coming back up to do any work or preventative work or anything. So
no, indeed, and you've got potentially the fires flaring up again on Thursday and Friday. Dave, I'm sorry about that. I enjoy your trip, and I hope your property survives and the whole township survives very well as well. When you get back, will you check in with us and let us know how it all went?
Oh, for sure. And I must say the community here have been astounding, and the local CFA have been absolutely fantastic. And because we border state forest and national park, their primary aim is to protect the town, and the controls that they're putting in place right now, while we've had these couple of days of rain and damp weather, has really been that could be the saviour of the town.
It might just be. Dave, thanks for calling in. All the best.
Thanks. Bye.
Good to hear from you. Just before we go to our next call, David Whiting, the business interruption insurance, is that a normal part of the business insurance you take out?
Well, for example, for my business, I have business interruption insurance.
But did you have to do that extra in relation to the general business insurance one might talk out?
I mean, if you own the building, you take out fire insurance, right? Yep. But business interruption insurance for me is loss of income while we re-establish, loss of records, those kinds of things. Most businesses would have business interruption insurance. Whether it's enough or not, it's a different question.
I should have got sleep interruption insurance before I had a child, shouldn't I? That would have been a very good idea.
No, I think there are other ways you could solve that problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a nanny. Yep.
Sleep interruptions insurance, brilliant idea. I want some insurance broker to come up with that one. I'll sign on. Alan in Hopetoun, hello.
Yeah, good morning. My question relates to the rights of landholders. In the Mallee here, we have quite a lot of landholders that adjoin substantial national parks that have been there for years. And every year almost we find a problem where fires will start in the national park, and there's very little preventive work done on the perimeters of the national park. It really seems to be the landholder's responsibility. And I know, obviously, I'm a volunteer at the CFA, and we spend a lot of time over summers past years fighting fires, but we've got to sit out the end of the national park into people's stubble or protecting crops. I want to know is, what's the legal liability or the rights of the landholders? They don't seem to have a lot of ground to work on because they can't do anything until the fire comes out, but the departments and the parks seem to make very little effort to prevent the fires getting out of the parks into the adjoining cropping ground, and I just wonder where the responsibility lies.
The test, Alan, is what started the fire, all right? It's not where the fire was, but what started the fire.
Well, mostly they're lightning strikes. There probably would be odd ones for campfires, but I would say the majority we find here are lightning strikes in the park.
Then you have no recourse for a lightning strike.
So there's
if there's a backburn...
No responsibility for the Parks Authority to make any effort to put any breaks in. I mean, we can put fire breaks around our crop, but they're limited in their scope when you've got a heavy stubble.
No.
So there's no responsibility on the parks at all.
No, every national park is slightly different, but as a general concept, the aim is in a national park is to keep it as pristine as humanly possible, not to cultivate it or manage it for the purpose of benefiting neighbours. So I've got some clients who are farmers, and nothing they hate more than the feral animals that come out of the forest.
Yeah, that's another problem we have too. Is kangaroos and the like. That wasn't the issue I was wondering about.
No, I understand. If they do fire retardation works that makes the situation worse, there is a liability on the state. But if there is a lightning strike that causes a fire, then the answer would be the national parks have no responsibility to you as an adjoining landowner.
Well, just one point on that.
Just finally, Alan.
Sorry?
Just finally, if you can.
Yeah, there was a fire went from Yarpeet, and it couldn't stop it till it got to Underbill. They had a break at Underbill, which is probably 70, 80 k's north.
Yes.
They couldn't do anything. We just had to let the fire burn and just protect the adjoining landholders, but the fire had to burn right through there till they got to a break at Underbill. Now, our argument is we should be putting breaks more and more often, but that's another argument, but I appreciate your point.
Yep, so that's the argument that you put to the government, is that you might say, quite happy to have a national park, but what I want you to do is break it up into chunks, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to get them to do. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not going to, but thank you, Alan.
Right, okay, thank you.
Alan, all the best. How's life out on the farm at the moment?
Oh, well, it's a bit smoky here today. It's hit Diamond Hope, and then there's quite a deal of smoke. I'm not sure whether it's come from South Australia or probably is from Kangaroo Island, but no, it's starting to clear now. The sun's come through, but I know we've had a reasonably good year, luckily, for harvest, and things are looking reasonably good. But we have got crews that have gone down because we're not in a big fire danger right now. I know there are crews calling down from here and further south to go down and help the Gippsland blokes, which they deserve.
Well, I'm glad to hear you got local crews involved. I'm glad to hear you've had a good year. Good on you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you.
David's in Doncaster. Hi, David. What's your question?
Oh, good morning. David, what's the situation with full-time employees of businesses that have had to be closed down because of the emergency in these fire-prone areas? Do they get paid any wages when they get back, or is that sort of
the employment? Whatever their employment contract was continues unless it's brought to an end. It's not suspended, if you like. So if you were a casual, then you don't get paid. Right. If you are a full-time employee, then it may well be that your employer directs you to take holidays.
Right.
All right. But if you don't have, and I would have said I would have great sympathy for a employer that required you to take holidays in this period. But if you don't have any holidays, it's possible for an employer to go to the Fair Work Commission and stand down employees.
Right.
So I suspend the period of employment that's a decision that's made by Fair Work. It's not a decision made by the employer.
David, are you the employer or the employee?
No, I've got a friend who's in one of these towns affected by the fires, and she's pretty much been living from hand to mouth, it seems, and she was inquiring as to whether, worried about when she's going to get back to work and whether she's entitled to any wages during the period that she hasn't been able to work.
Well, the question is, why hasn't she been able to work?
Well,
so let's say I work in a supermarket and the supermarket burns down, then there's still an employment obligation. Right? Now, there may well be a whole series of applications made to Fair Work, to suspend the employment contract for a period of time.
Until that's done, then she's still entitled to her wages.
Well, there may be an argument about holidays. It's what Virginia was talking about. How do we allocate the pain, if you like, or how is the pain shared?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, and that's a live conversation. Thanks for calling in. Bernadette makes the observation on text, David. Hi, Virginia. In the grand scheme of things, a lost holiday seems very trivial given the current circumstances. Perhaps the holiday maker would consider the lost money their contribution to the bushfire appeal and not seek refund from the landlords. And that's clearly occurred to many people who are just leaving it lie. But Rufus makes this point. Hey, Virginia, what about a holiday rental situation where the area is under a watch and act? The house is still available, but you're at risk if you head into the area. Haven't been evacuated, haven't been ordered out.
A watch and alert normally says if you're a visitor, please go away.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it more closely and see. I'll get one printed out and see. But
I've had some friends in the country areas, and I was looking at fires, and I think a watch and act says if you're a visitor, please leave.
Interesting. I'll have a closer look at one. But so there you go. So the same situation applies. Interruption of business potentially. Hey, look, really useful having you on board today, David. Thank you. Before you go, a quick question here from Bernie in Geelong, but I suspect this is a conversation, a big one for a later stage. Bernie, hello.
Hello, Dave, Virginia. I've got a question for David. David, the Victorian government accepted a fuel reduction target of 5% after the Royal Commission and the fires of 2009. Victorian government has failed to meet this commitment. Where do the people stand?
It depends how it was enshrined in legislation, if at all. But I'd start at a different point, Bernie. There were a series of recommendations made by another Bernie, Bernie Teague, in his Royal Commission in 2009.
And we can share with you that Bernard Teague will be joining the program after 11 a.m, and we're going to answer the question, were the recommendations met?
So that you could get your answer there then, Bernie.
Bernie, stick around. Bernie in Geelong. Please stick around for Bernie Teague of Melbourne. And it should be a very, very interesting and illuminating conversation. David, always good to see you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Virginia. See you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. David Whiting, our regular Talkback lawyer. Now remember, you can always call the Disaster Legal Help Victoria phone line for any assistance you might need legally in relation to this disaster. 1800 113 432. That's 1800 113 432. They're available Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's free legal information, advice and referrals. The website is Disaster Legal Help. That's one word, disasterlegalhelp.org.au.